6 months ago when Jordan and Philippa asked me to come here and speak at ARC about the importance of...
Are you tired of the constant barrage of woke culture? In a speech that shook the world, Konstantin Kisin delivers powerful insights that every truth seeker needs to hear.
And to my colleagues in new media especially, I say this: the legacy media is dying for a reason. They cannot be saved, they cannot be reformed. Let's stop complaining about them and start...
This guy's story is pretty cool. He started out as a comedian, making people laugh with his sharp wit and clever observations. You know how comedians often see the world differently? Kisin was no exception, but he didn't just stop at comedy. Eventually, Kisin co-founded the Trigonometry podcast, which has become a massive hit. It's not your typical podcast, it's a space where real, no-holds-barred conversations happen. Think of it as a place where tough questions get asked and even tougher answers are given. Kisin and his co-host, Francis Foster, tackle everything from politics to culture, and nothing is off limits. This shift from comedy to podcasting allowed Kisin to use his humor and sharp mind to dig deep into the issues that really matter. Kisin isn't just some guy with a microphone. He's become a significant voice in contemporary social discourse. Thanks to the internet and social media, his reach is enormous. His insightful takes on controversial topics often go viral, sparking conversations all over the world.
Fit in our pockets that allow us to do amazing things. This morning, I destroyed someone on Twitter with facts and logic from the toilet. It's magic.
On platforms like YouTube and Twitter, Kisin has built a loyal following. People tune in to hear his thoughts because he's not afraid to say what a lot of us are thinking, but might not dare to say out loud. His straightforward style and willingness to call out woke culture resonate with many who feel the same way, but don't have the platform to express it. One of the reasons Kisin stands out is his background. He's originally from the Soviet Union, so when he talks about freedom and the dangers of ideological extremes, he speaks from experience. His perspectives are not just theoretical, they're grounded in real-world experiences, which adds a lot of weight to his arguments. Kisin's role in social discourse today is crucial. He's one of the few voices challenging the mainstream narrative and encouraging people to think critically. In a world where so many are afraid to speak up, Kisin's courage to speak his mind is refreshing and needed. His influence is growing, and it's clear he's making a significant impact on how we discuss and understand the complex issues of our time.
Conservative something. You will never get young people to want to conserve a society and an economy that is not working for them. We will not overcome woke nihilism as long as young people are locked out of the housing market, unable to pair up, unable to have kids, unable...
Learning about Konstantin Kisin's epic takedown of modern Western culture here, especially the whole woke culture phenomenon. Kisin doesn't pull any punches. He sees woke culture as a real danger to our society. Why? Because it focuses more on virtue signaling than on actual virtues. It's all about looking good rather than doing good. Kisin argues that this obsession with being politically correct and avoiding offense is making us weak. We're more concerned with microaggressions and safe spaces than with the big issues that actually matter. Woke culture, according to Kisin, is like a disease eating away at the core of our society. It promotes victimhood and blames the past for all present woes, which stifles innovation and progress. Instead of encouraging people to be resilient and strive for greatness, it encourages them to see themselves as perpetual victims of some societal boogeyman. Kisin brilliantly uses historical figures like Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Christopher Columbus to draw parallels with our current societal issues. Solzhenitsyn, a Soviet dissident, famously said that the strength of a society depends more on its spiritual life than on its level of industrialization. Kisin uses this to highlight how our focus on material progress without spiritual or moral grounding is leading us to ruin.
There's probably more flat earthers now than there were in the 15th century. God bless the internet. The reason Columbus discovered America is not that he'd worked out that the earth was...
Take Columbus, for example. Kisin acknowledges that Columbus wasn't perfect, far from it, but the man had audacity. He dared to venture into the unknown, driven by a vision. Today, Columbus would be crucified for his flaws without any recognition of his achievements. Kisin's point is that we can't just erase history because it doesn't fit modern sensibilities. Instead, we should learn from it, warts and all. Kisin hits hard on the idea of spiritual and moral decay. He argues that our society is rotting from the inside out because we've lost our sense of purpose and moral direction. He talks about seeing people celebrate mass murder and the police spending more time on social media debates than enforcing the law. These are signs, he says, that our spiritual energies are exhausted. A society without a strong moral foundation is like a tree with a rotten core. It can't stand. This spiritual decay, according to Kisin, is why we see so much division and chaos. We're obsessed with tearing down the old without having anything solid to replace it with. Kisin warns that if we don't address this moral rot, no amount of technological or industrial progress will save us from collapse. One of the most inspiring parts of Kisin's speech is his call for audacity and adventure. He reminds us of the daring spirit of explorers like Columbus, who sailed into the unknown with no guarantee of success. It's this kind of audacity that built the Western world. Kisin argues that we need to reclaim this spirit to solve today's problems.
I say to our friends in the media, truth matters. We are in the fight of our lives. There is more.
Instead of being afraid of making mistakes, we should embrace them as part of the journey. Kisin points out that the West was built by people who dared to believe they could overcome any challenge. This sense of adventure and willingness to take risks is what has driven human progress for centuries. Kisin is telling us to stop whining and start doing. We need to tackle our problems head-on with the same boldness that drove Columbus to discover the New World. It's time to stop apologizing for our history and start building a future we can be proud of. One of the first things he talks about is the mass celebrations of violence that we've been seeing in modern society. It's pretty shocking. Kisin points out how disturbing it is to see crowds openly celebrating acts of mass murder on the streets of our cities. He doesn't mince words here. This kind of behavior is a clear sign of moral decay. It's like society has lost its moral compass, and people are applauding things that should horrify us. He draws a stark picture of how far we've fallen when it comes to our values. Instead of condemning violence and standing up for justice, there are groups that seem to revel in chaos and destruction. Kisin's observation is a wake-up call, urging us to recognize and address this disturbing trend before it spirals further out of control. Kisin doesn't stop at just the general public. He also takes a hard look at the police. He criticizes how law enforcement seems to be more invested in debating Islamic theology on Twitter than actually enforcing the law. This is a pretty serious accusation, and Kisin backs it up by pointing out that the police are spending more time on social media than dealing with real-world issues. He's essentially saying that our priorities are all messed up. Instead of focusing on keeping our streets safe and protecting citizens, the police are getting bogged down in online debates and virtue signaling. This, according to Kisin, is another sign of our societal decline. We need law enforcement to do its job, which is to enforce the law, not to engage in endless ideological battles online. One of the things that makes Kisin's speech so compelling is his use of personal anecdotes. He shares a story about a recent trip to Barcelona with his wife, which really drives home his points in a relatable way. So, picture this. Kisin and his wife are walking down La Rambla, the famous street in Barcelona. They come across the Christopher Columbus monument, which gets him thinking about his son, Nikolai. He describes how his 16-month-old son sits on his hip and points in the direction he wants to go, like a little explorer. It's a cute image, but Kisin uses it to make a bigger point. He compares his son's innocent determination to the way society should be, driven, curious, and unafraid to venture into the unknown. Instead, we're throwing tantrums and demanding things without putting in the work, much like a toddler when they don't get their way.
Who believe that our history is evil, that we do not deserve to be great, we do not deserve to be powerful, that we must be punished for the sins of our ancestors. To them, our past is abominable, our present must be spent apologizing, and our future is managed.
Kisin's stories about his personal life add a layer of authenticity to his speech. They make his arguments more tangible and relatable. For instance, he talks about how his wife suggested they take a holiday to clear his mind. It's a simple, everyday moment that many of us can relate to. Yet, through this story, he subtly critiques our modern work ethic and our tendency to lose sight of what's important. His reflection on the Columbus Monument is particularly powerful. He acknowledges Columbus's flaws, but emphasizes the audacity and adventure that led to his discoveries. It's a reminder that our history is complex, and while we should learn from the past, we shouldn't be so quick to erase it. By sharing these personal anecdotes, Kisin connects with his audience on a deeper level. He's not just a commentator standing on a soapbox. He's a person experiencing the same world we all live in, with the same frustrations and hopes. This makes his speech not only informative, but also deeply engaging and relatable. Konstantin Kisin's key arguments against woke culture, starting with education and academia. Kisin really hits the nail on the head when he talks about how woke ideologies are infiltrating our schools and universities. You know how it feels like kids these days are being taught to see the world through a lens of oppression and victimhood? Kisin argues that this is a direct result of woke culture seeping into education. He points out that instead of being places of learning and intellectual growth, many educational institutions have become breeding grounds for these woke ideologies. Critical race theory, gender studies, and other similar subjects often focus more on promoting a particular worldview than on encouraging critical thinking. Students are being taught to see themselves as victims or oppressors based on their race or gender, which Kisin believes is divisive and counterproductive. He's concerned that this focus on identity politics is distracting from real education. Instead of learning about history, science, and literature, students are being indoctrinated with a one-sided view of the world. This, according to Kisin, is dumbing down education and failing to prepare students for the real world. Kisin has a lot to say about how woke culture is rewriting history. Have you noticed how there's a growing trend to tear down statues and rename buildings because the historical figures they commemorate don't fit today's moral standards? Kisin finds this alarming. He argues that erasing parts of our history is dangerous. Sure, figures like Christopher Columbus and Winston Churchill weren't perfect, but their contributions to history are significant. Kisin believes that we need to understand our history in its entirety, the good, the bad, and the ugly. By removing statues and renaming landmarks, we're essentially whitewashing history to fit a modern narrative. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.